one student's K through 12 journey. This girl, Zoe, traveled through a classical education for 12 years, and she chronicles her experience in these books. And so just to get us started, we're going to give these away. And here's how you can win the first one. If you can tell me what the Latin-derived word from Scholé is. Scholé is a Greek word, and there's a Latin word that comes from it. The first person who can type what that word is and type it correctly, the Latin word that comes from Scholé, will get one of these books. So, have at it. Oops, someone's saying no audio. I think that the audio is working, Jennifer, because others are hearing me. So you might take a look at your settings, make sure you don't have a mute button on your audio. Okay, we've got some pretty good guesses, and probably educated guesses, I dare say. Okay, Vanna, nice job. Scola is the correct Latin derivative from Scholé, so you get one of these books. And if you're comfortable, just send your name and address to info@classicalsubjects.com. That's info@classicalsubjects.com. And now for the second book. This is Vanna's. I'm going to set it aside for her. This is a little trickier. This is, the word Scholé in Greek means leisure, restful learning, contemplation, and conversation. There is a Latin word that means leisure. It's not scola. Scola ends up meaning a group of students, a school, and so on. But there's another Latin word that means to be at leisure. It literally means leisure or being at rest. If you can come up with that, Amanda, you've got it. Amanda, a good Latin name there for Amanda. All right, Amanda, if you do the same thing, just send an email to info@classicalsubjects.com with your address. You get this other book. Yeah, otium, it's interesting. From otium, we get the word otios, which means living a life of ease and luxury. There's also an interesting word, negotium in Latin. Negotium, nego means I deny. Otium means leisure, idleness. So negotium means to be denying yourself leisure, which means you're doing business, and that's what negotium means, business, from which we get the word negotiate. Okay, enough of the etymology. Let's jump into Scholé. I wonder if it was a challenge for some of you, except for John waking up at 8, there on Norfolk Island in the South Pacific. I wonder if it was a challenge for some of you to carve out some time today. I think we're probably all Americans here, maybe a few Europeans, and we're busy, and we get kind of pushed around by the waves of our own culture and our own careers and lives, and to some degree we even like it that way. It's kind of the water we swim in. We get used to just being busy. So I bet it was hard for some of you to just carve away some time, and there are some of you who, even despite the fact that you've got some hot tea going or some hot chocolate or coffee, are still feeling the pull of the day all around you. Some of you have kids behind you who will be clamoring at one time or another for your attention. Some of you are not in an enclosed, quiet space where you can really reflect. Some of you are. Even here at the classical academic offices, we've closed a door. We've tried to quiet things down, but there's a kind of buzz all around our building. Things are happening. So how can I enter into a space that is quiet? I see Sarah saying 6 kids, twin infants on my lap. So, which of course these things are good. Being busy is not a bad thing in and of itself, but when it becomes all-encompassing and all-absorbing, it swallows up the contemplative life. And part of the classical tradition of education includes this tradition of restful learning, or Scholé. It goes all the way back to Plato and Aristotle, and it moves through the ancient church and through Western civilization to our present day. And it's one of the hardest aspects of the classical tradition of education for busy Americans, frenetic Americans, to recover. It's hard for me. In fact, once I was going to a convention to give this talk among some others, and I was mentioning this to my wife, and she looked at me and she said, "You've got to stop giving that talk." And I said, "Why?" And she said, "Because you don't live it." Well, that she spoke as only a wife can speak, and I had to agree that this is not a battle that I have won. This is an ongoing challenge for me, and yet I recognize it as something very important. So I'm sure that's the case for some of you, and so let's put all of our souls at ease and realize that we have to lean into this and walk into this, and that it's going to be awkward and it may take some time to really recover it. So can we do that? Okay. It's worth recovering a tradition that we weren't given, especially with integrity, takes time to recover. We have to kind of walk in these shoes for a while. We have to acclimate to what it means to live a contemplative life again. And then we have to acclimate to teaching it and imparting it to our children as well. So it will take some time. Well, I'm going to move through a few slides and make some comments, and I'm going to pause. I'm going to try to pause at least 2 or 3 times during this presentation and just take some questions. And hopefully there'll be time at the very end for questions as well, so we can interact a bit. If you'd like some notes, you can email me right here using my email address at classicalsubjects.com. If you'd like my Introduction to Classical Ed, you can download that for free at classicalacademicpress.com, education resources. This particular slide shows kind of the whole picture of classical education, and it's we're trying to pull all these pieces together. You'll see one piece up there in the top right-hand corner, right up here. See if I can draw. Hang on a moment. There we go. There it is. That Scholé leisure piece is what we're going to be focusing on today. You can see that the larger tradition includes a lot of other pieces as well, but this is a key piece. Sometimes, and this is just a brief introduction, sometimes when we're trying to go forward, we actually make progress by going backwards. C.S. Lewis said that if you're lost in the woods, sometimes the best way to make progress is to actually go back to where you started. And that's partly what we're doing in the classical tradition. These old ideas are actually very fresh. They're ideas that never really grow old. So we want to take a look at the best that's gone before us, and this life of a Scholé or contemplation is one of them. Proverbs 22, do not move the ancient the landmarks. So these are some landmarks, if you will, that have been laid down for us. Jeremiah 6, keep to the ancient paths. A very interesting passage there in Jeremiah 6. So the response is, we won't do so, but that's what we need to do, is keep to some of these ancient paths. And it was Chesterton who said that every revolution is a restoration. And he's playing with that word revolve, because volvo in Latin means to turn, and revolvo means to turn again. So a revolution is a kind of coming back to where you once were, like a wheel turning. The car company Volvo is adequately named. It means I turn. And Sayers, in her essay, The Lost Tools of Learning, she says, she's responding to the people who says, well, we can't go back. We can't go backwards in time. And she says, well, let's make a distinction. We can't time travel, but we can go back, and we do go back every day in the sense of correcting an error. So we're going back and we're looking at the things that have worked well, the principles and practices that have served human beings for centuries, that have worked well, and we're redeploying them, recovering them. So we can go back in that sense. And finally, it's because some things about human nature and principles of education don't change over time. Human nature is constant. The needs of the 6-year-old Roman boy in the first century are in many ways the same as a 6-year-old American boy. Good ideas don't grow old. They're evergreen and ever fresh. And that's the case with this tradition of Scholé. Now, you might think, well, this is just old stuff. trying to old stuff made new again. That's great. Well, it's interesting how it, by even looking at what modern thinkers are discussing and exploring, even those who are not trying intentionally to recover a classical tradition, even those who are doing modern research, often are rediscovering principles and practices that really are a part of this tradition. I'll cite for you one great book that does this. It's Tony Wagner's book, the Harvard education professor. You might be skeptical of education professors out of Harvard, but he's one that you should welcome. The book is called The Global Achievement Gap. And in that book, published a couple of years ago, he describes 7 survival skills that, based on his research of going to government agencies, the military, and businesses, he discovered that there were 7 skills that all of these different sectors of society needed very much in people coming into those sectors. And he calls them survival skills that are needed in the 21st century. Here's that list of the 7 survival skills. Critical thinking and problem solving, collaboration across networks and leading by influence, agility and adaptability, initiative and entrepreneurialism, effective oral and written communication, accessing and analyzing information, and curiosity and imagination. You could go through most of these lists and find principles and practices from the classical tradition, because these are ideas that humanize individuals and make them the best versions of themselves. That's a large part of what classical education has always sought to do, is to educate a free person to be free and remain free. Free to do all kinds of things, vocationally and otherwise. But look at the last one, curiosity and imagination. This overlaps nicely with the concept of Scholé. We need people who can think. My father-in-law, who's a federal prosecutor, once said that sometimes you can tell if you've got a good lawyer on your hands if you go into the office and you find him or her with feet kicked up over the desk, staring at the wall, thinking about the law. He once said, there's always room for another lawyer, another good lawyer. Otherwise, no, perhaps. So creative, contemplative, imaginative people who can think and think across a longer stretch of time than most of us can, who have been trained to distraction by our commercial culture, etc. Well, there's much to say about that. We don't want to go too far down that path, but Nick Carr, in his book, How the Internet is Making Us Stupid, The Shallows, talks about how even he is a 40-something-year-old, because of the internet, reading websites all the time and commercials, even he was losing his ability to concentrate and engage in sustained reading and argumentation and thinking. So we need to recover this. It's very important. It's needed today, according to Tony Wagner, in all of the important sectors of our society. So we return to Scholé, and you see the accent mark over the E. It's pronounced with a long E at the end, Scholé. If you say Scholé instead of Scholé, that's all right. But it's the Greek word. It has a range of meaning. It means leisure, but it doesn't mean leisure in the sense of an American vacation where you just kick your feet back and kind of do nothing except read a novel at the beach, say. Not that that's bad. It's actually that refreshing, exhilarating kind of thinking and conversation that comes when you're in a beautiful environment with really good friends and perhaps even with good food and drink, discussing the ideas that matter most. That might be a portrait or a picture of Scholé. So we could summarize it as contemplation, leisure, restful or leisurely learning, often with friends in conversation together. That's the heart of Scholé. And from the Greek word Scholé, we get our English word school. And of course, that's a kind of irony, because our schools are not very much like Scholé. And as Vanna knows, we also get our Latin word scola from Scholé, and also the German word Schule. We need to recover this. Think about modern education. Think about the typical public school down the road. How many classes in the junior high and and high school? 7 or 8, 43 minutes a day, bells ringing, moving down the halls. Weekly assessments that are data-driven and numerically graded, possibly by computers. Standardized tests, teaching to the test. Students and teachers frenetic for their scores. Students getting them so they can get to the next good thing that they want, maybe getting into college. Teachers so that they can maintain the good graces of their administrators so they can keep the funding, and so on. Is it any surprise that by the time most American students are 13 or 14, they're not that interested in discussing ideas? So we need to put the Scholé back into school. It's also true that about 75% of what we present to students in an environment, frankly, like this, that's didactic and somewhat univocal, with kind of one voice speaking to many in front of a whiteboard, or in this case, a PowerPoint presentation. How much of this kind of information do you think you will remember 1 week or 2 weeks out? How many sermons do you really remember? Well, we forget most of what we receive in this particular kind of didactic environment. So why do we do it so much? In most schools, and I would say even in a lot of our home schools, even in our classical schools, we tend to teach the way we were taught, which is to adapt a kind of, I'm generalizing a bit here, but a kind of cram, test, and forget cycle, where we expect students to memorize what we present, either in a book or a whiteboard or some other more or less didactic fashion, get it back to us in the form of some kind of written assessment, often that features a lot of ID questions, fill in the blank, multiple choice, grade it, get it back, and then what happens to that information? It's not really retained very well. But the things that we discuss and pursue together with engagement and where something's at stake and with good friends, these things can stay with us longer and we're more engaged. So Scholé can be described also as the disposition of receptive understanding, a contemplative beholding and immersion in the real. Now this is coming from Pieper, some of this language. He says this, and by the way, when I say Pieper, I mean this book. He is the one who has helped me to understand this tradition. So I'm channeling Pieper. I would like to just appear to be brilliant and have learned all of this by kind of a big study of hundreds of books. But if you get this book and study it for about 3 years, you can give a seminar similar to this. But the trick is not just starting to get the philosophy, these principles. More importantly, we need to think deeply about this so that we can begin to apply it, implement it practically in our schools and home schools and in our own lives. But Pieper says only someone who has lost the spiritual power to be at leisure can be bored. The students, the kids who say, well, Mom, I don't know what to do. What should I do? Chesterton said there are no dull subjects, only dull people. So sometimes we can become dulled. And our culture is having its impact on us, no doubt. I think it was Samuel Johnson said about an acquaintance, he's not only dull, but the cause of dullness in others. We don't want to be that. We don't want to be dulled, or God forbid that we would become the cause of dullness in others. But only someone, Pieper says, who has lost the spiritual power to be at leisure, in the sense that we've described it, can be bored. And Pieper says that we are being overwhelmed by what he calls the total world of work. Now, work is not bad. He doesn't think work is bad. But the workaday world, as we have come to know it in the modern West, can so overwhelm us and absorb us that we become essentially workers. What do you do? Hi, what is your name? How are you? What do you do? These become the important defining aspects of our lives. We become something like more functionary than thoughtful as human beings. And Pieper says that really Scholé is a kind of work, but it's a kind of work that's refreshing and exhilarating because it's engaging this other aspect of our humanity, both of which are important. And you'll see a little bit later, he's going to define these kind of two aspects of our society as what he calls kind of the comune utile. I'm using Latin here, but it's that community of practical work, and then what he calls this other community of Scholé, which involves this more humanizing aspect of a contemplative existence in life. So the Greek is actually uses a verb to do. So if you see the Greek there, let me just find my pen here. I'll underline it for you. Scholen agein means to do leisure. The way that Aristotle talks about it is leisure is something to be done. So it's something you do, and yet you will also see it's something that is very receptive in its orientation. Okay, I'm going to stop there for a moment and just take a look at some of the comments or questions that may have come up. I have to be careful about trying to do too many things at once. So I've been seeing out of the left, at the corner of my left eye, I've been seeing some things happening in the chat box over here, trying not to be distracted. But now I will stop and I will look at the chat box. Let's see what we have. Okay, Peeper, yes, Cheryl spelled it for us. It's Pieper. Thank you there, Cheryl. Let's see. The full title. Yes, I'll put it up on the camera again. Here it is. It's Leisure, the Basis of Culture. And by the way, we will be posting a link to this so that if people want to see it later, they can. But this video, but it's Leisure, the Basis of Culture. Ooh, and Taryn has actually gone to Amazon and put it there. Thank you. Cheryl says, I think it is hard to rest, and it is a spiritual gift or work, not something we do on our own. Cheryl, I think you're onto something there. This is spiritually discerned. And if you think about it, those of you who are in the Christian tradition, as I am, will know that the scriptures talk a lot about meditation. Psalm 1 says that the righteous man who is planted by the streams of water being refreshed, and just even that image of he's like a tree planted by streams of water, produces fruit in its season. Its leaves does not wither, and whatever he does prospers. It's a beautiful image. And he says in that same psalm that he delights in the law of the Lord day and night. He meditates on the law of the Lord day and night. So where is the meditation in our lives? Paul in 1 Corinthians 3 says that we gaze with unveiled faces upon Christ, and we are transformed into his image with ever-increasing glory. Or if you go back to the Psalm 27, the psalmist says that he desires one thing, to dwell in the temple of the Lord and to gaze on the beauty of the Lord in his temple. And he says, this is one thing I seek. So where is that seeking, that gazing? We need that. Or think about Paul in Colossians 3, who says, set your mind on things above, where Christ is seated, the right hand of God. Or in Philippians 4, to dwell on the things that are beautiful and virtuous and noble and good. He says, let your mind dwell on these things. Where is the dwelling? Well, we don't make time for meditation or dwelling or setting our minds on virtually anything. We flit about. And you're tempted to flit about right now because you're in front of a multimedia computer screen. So it's hard to find these times to get along. Or think about Christ in Luke 10, the story of Mary and Martha. Christ visits this home, and he's having dinner at the home of Mary and Martha. And Martha is preparing for the meal, and she's very busy in the kitchen, I assume. And Mary is sitting with Christ, and Christ is speaking and teaching and talking with her. And Martha comes in and says, Jesus, don't you care about me? Tell my sister to help me. And you know what Christ says? He says, Martha, Martha, you are busy and worried about many things. Doesn't that describe you and I? You and me? We are busy about so many things. And he goes on to say, but Mary has chosen what is best, and what she has chosen will not be taken from her. So when do we sit at Christ's feet? Or when do we sit in the presence of truth, goodness, and beauty and receive it as a gift and experience this immersion in this good reality, which is the world that God has made and the people who are in it? Okay. Stop there for a moment. I'm looking again at the chat boxes for a moment. Okay, good. People saying hello. See, you're being distracted. It's okay to be a little distracted in that way. Well, let's go on. Feel free to drop in some questions. I'm going to go through this slide and I'll look at the questions again. I've already done most of this slide, so that's good news, isn't it? Scholé, the word contemplation is another Latin word that contemplatio, which describes what a life of Scholé is. And it comes from con, which means with, and templum, which means temple, to be within the temple. And it goes back to this Roman idea that the priest would be in the temple trying to discern the omens in the pagan world. But they would have to take their time and examine things and try to figure out what the will of the gods was indicating. But this is helpful, isn't it, as an image, that this etymology, to be in a quiet place, giving yourself up to something. That's kind of at the root of the word contemplation. And then we've looked at Psalm 27 already, in Psalm 1, 2 Corinthians 3. Christ spending 40 days before he chooses the disciples in prayer and meditation. This idea of contemplation means to look at or view something with continued attention, to observe or study thoughtfully. It can mean also to consider thoroughly, to think fully or deeply about something. And of course, this means time, and it means a particular kind of place or space. It doesn't seem terribly efficient, does it? And you go into your modern class, or even you might feel this, so those of you who are homeschoolers, you might feel like, I have to keep moving through the chapters. I have to move through the curriculum. I have to check off this chapter. I have to get this done and then that done. And if I check off all these boxes, I think at the end I'll have education. It doesn't always work quite that way. And then Pieper unpacks the difference between how especially the medievals thought about our minds as both ratio and intellectus. Ratio and intellectus. And they saw that these were two parts of our humanity that were equally important. The ratio, from which we get our word, rationation or rational, it means reason. And it's that part of us that does the running around to gather facts, to classify and categorize information, does the researching. That's a very important part of being a human being and being made in the image of God. It's good. Intellectus was another part of the human being in the medieval's mind, and intellectus meant that part of us. It didn't mean highbrow, high IQ, as in the sense of the word intellectual. No, it comes from the Latin word intuo, which means to gaze at something, to gaze, not just look, but to gaze. So it's that part of our minds that receptively contemplates and takes in that which we are beholding. It's a lingering gaze at something important to us, and it could be that which is true, good, and beautiful. It's receptive, and it's receiving the good things like a gift, rather than running out trying to grab things. Its hands are open receptively. When was the last time you had a intellectus experience? Often it happens in nature. Sometimes it happens in the experience of something beautiful. Sitting in a tree, lying in the grass in the summer, and feeling the sun beating down upon you and a breeze blowing through you, and hearing birds and watching clouds move, or maybe hearing a symphony or some other beautiful piece of music, something that takes you away from the world for a moment and engages you so that you gaze with your mind's eye as well as your real eye. That is also important and very much a part of a Scholé education. What do you think we're good at doing? What are we best at doing? Well, it's clearly the ratio. What we need to recover more of is the intellectus. So, for a moment, this is a painting by Caravaggio, the Italian Renaissance painting. And this is the painting of Thomas examining the wound of Christ. And you remember the passage in John where Jesus says, Thomas, when he appears, be no longer unbelieving, but believe. Here are my hands. Here's my side. Put your finger in my side and in my hands. And so here is Thomas putting his finger in the side of Christ with very astounded, curious disciples looking over the shoulder. This painting is a reminder that Christ himself says, examine, look, consider, think, believe, and even invites Thomas to do this. It's an astounding image, and it reminds us that anything that is good is something we should put our finger in. Anything that is true and beautiful requires this kind of attention as well. Isn't that beautiful? There's a close-up of that image. Caravaggio inviting us as well to gaze and to be astonished at this invitation of Christ. And here is Rembrandt's The Prodigal Son. Henri Nouwen wrote a book called The Prodigal Son. He had heard that this particular painting was in a monastery in Russia, and he traveled and spent 3 days in this monastery. He spent 3 days in front of this painting, staring at it, observing it. Was he using mainly his ratio or his intellectus? His intellectus. And as a result of this experience of examining this painting, Nouwen, in some interesting ways, was changed. And he wrote a book called The Prodigal Son. And if we had the time, and if we had a guide like Nouwen or an art historian could perhaps guide us through this, but here's a look at the father and look at the emotion on his face. Here's a close-up of that look, of that face. Here's the son with the tattered clothes returning back, burying his head in the bosom of his father. What could we learn if we took some time and just studied this painting? And note, of course, that it was actually the parable of Christ that was reflected on by Rembrandt, who then painted the painting, that was then seen by Nouwen, who then wrote the book that brought it to my attention, and now is bringing it to your attention. I'll pause there for a moment. So if you have a question or comment that you'd like to just drop in the chat box, now I will allow myself to be distracted and to see what you might say or think. Okay. Yes, Laura Bettis, the notes will be available later. So if you email me at cparent@classicalsubjects.com. At the end, I'll try to put that up again, but it's cparent@classicalsubjects.com. I'll be glad to send you the notes to this. Let's see. Oh yes, Joanna making an interesting point about Samuel resting in the house when he hears. When do you hear? You hear when you listen. And Joseph Pieper makes this point in one of his essays. Only those who are listeners actually end up hearing. It's different to listen than it is to hear, isn't it? And someone by the name of Mobile Guest says, I think the idea of leisure is also a way of moving toward contemplative prayer. Yes. These things begin to intersect, right? That prayer and contemplation and even study start to merge. In fact, another book, this book by Sertalange, The Intellectual Life, which is about a life of being a student, a contemplative student, he says that study is a prayer to the truth. That's worth thinking about. That he says study is a divine office because you're interacting with truth, goodness, and beauty. And whenever you interact and touch and come into contact with truth, you're coming into contact with the truth. And we know in the Christian tradition that God is truth. You're coming into contact with that which is divine. And so worship, wonder, a response of celebration and praise is natural even when we're doing our studies, even when we're doing biology. And that's why the slide says that a school of Scholé is a school of wonder. And Pieper says wonder leads to worship. So much insight there in that comment. Cheryl says, and so this should be done through fellowship not private meditation or conjunction. I think it's both, Cheryl. Certainly alone there can be important contemplation, but in conversation, Scholé also has this connotation of friends coming together too, so I think it's both. In the temple, it made me think of Jesus at the age of 12, says Leanne, sitting and talking with the priest in the temple, yes. And let's see. Jana says, it makes me think of the scene in the movie about William Wilberforce when after he was saved, he was found lying out on the grass contemplating the sky. Great. Good stuff. I. Ludwig says, where is this model today? Education today has so many requirements that need to be met. And transcripts. How important is it to discuss these topics in community and in person, especially if a classical ed group is not locally accessible? All good questions. I would say to Ludwig, where is this model today? There are schools and homeschools that are starting to do it, and it's not around every corner. And let me give you an example. Direct you to classicaleducator.com. You can sign up on that site, and let me just write that down, see if I can do that here. I think you've got it, but classicaleducator.com. Okay, I'm kind of writing like a first grader, but that's okay. Classicaleducator.com, and there is a video by Jenny Rowlands. And if you look up this particular video, she describes, that's Rawlins, she describes how she's tried to make this happen in her classroom. And I think she's done quite a great job. So there's one school, and that's the school there is the Ambrose School in Boise, Idaho. And just to hear her talk about how she has tried to take these ideas and apply them in a classroom, you'll be astounded. She's taken it to some great some great lengths practically applying it. Okay, I'm going to continue. Going through this slide, and this won't take too long. A school of Scholé, a school of wonder. The Greeks had a word for their everyday work that they needed to do to earn their bread. And that word, one of their words of choice, was askale, meaning not being at leisure. And what this does, by making this a negative, it means that what they really privilege is Scholé. Scholé is the high thing. It's the place where you find happiness and great fulfillment in your life, perhaps the greatest fulfillment in your life. The Greek word for happiness was eudaimonia, and it meant having a wonderful spirit, you might say, literally rendered. But that was happiness to Aristotle. And it happened when you were engaged in Scholé. I've already mentioned otium and negotium, an interesting etymological study there. Otium meaning leisure, and negotium, the Latin word for business, meaning not being at leisure. I've talked about contemplation, conversation, and by the way, this means to converse from the Latin means to turn with. So when you're in a conversation, you're kind of turning with someone, almost dancing with someone as you're exploring something wonderful like truth, goodness, and beauty. But we need to give ourselves time to be at wonder in the world. And one way that the Greeks in particular described early education, say in the elementary years, was education should be an education in delight and wonder. It should be a kind of musical education inspired by the muses that involved the study of literature, dance, poetry, history, the history and literature and dances and poems of your people, the songs of your people, that engage students in enjoyment, delight, and wonder. Well, the Christians picked up on this, and it's actually, you see it in the Hebrew tradition anyway, and took it and developed it over the centuries. Now I'm going to talk about the two ways that Pieper describes the way we tend to live in our world in two kind of different communities, one called bonum utile and the other bonum commune. The bonum utile is that part of our existence that means we have to do good work. And good work is important. So please don't hear from me in this seminar that that I am critical of the work we must do. The everyday work that we must do is also to be set apart as a good thing. And in the Christian tradition, it's sanctified and holy and good. But we also need time to engage in what Pieper calls the bonum commune, this communal good that comes when we're together in wonder. And let's take a look at that for just a moment. These two things, in Pieper's view, these two aspects of living should be in a kind of balance. They're both good. But what he says has happened in the busy civilized West. Well, can you guess what's happened? What do you think the next diagram will be? Just think about that for a moment. If they're to be in a kind of proportional relationship, the world of our work, the world of our leisure, what do you think the next slide will be? Anyone want to? Yes, okay, Cheryl. Cheryl, I think you've got it. It's which gets larger and which begins to take up more of our mental space as well as our physical space and time. It's the world of our work, and the world of the Scholé communal intellectus life starts to shrink and shrink further and further and separate until, for many Americans, this is what we're left with. And our leisure becomes the stereotypical American vacation where we work for the sake of a kind of rest that is not really restful. We sometimes take breaks, but we don't rest. I remember when a pastor once challenged me when I said, oh, well, maybe we can get to that during the Christmas break. And he said, really, the Christmas break? Is that what it is? That's the way we've started to think this way. We've been enculturated, and we need to now try to change that and reacclimate ourselves to the bonum commune, as he talks about it. And if we were to do a T-chart here and compare these two aspects of life, we can see that there's a lot of kind of dichotomies, and these dichotomies are going to be generalizations. In other words, they're going to be exaggerated, but I still think they communicate something important that we need to pay attention to. In the world of our work, we have our workaday life, the jobs that we must do and everything associated with them. On the other side, in the bonum commune, the life of Scholé, we have leisure and freedom. We're not required to spend our time in a certain way. It's liberal. On this side, we have training, and over on this side, we have education, the difference between job training, career prep, and educating a soul, which is a much larger endeavor that helps you become the best version of yourself. Certainly affects how you work and your job and your vocation, but has much more in scope than just the job that you will do. Power over here, wonder, joy, and celebration over here. The means, work as a means, but leisure is really our ends. It's something that we really find our final and more ultimate joy and fulfillment doing. Ratio over here, and intellectus over here. You might say, I'm riffing off of C.S. Lewis now in his book, The Abolition of Man, but we have a lot of head over here, we have the chest over here, or affections, cultivated affections. Over here we have the useful, and over here you might say we have the blessed. And this side, the world is considered to be raw material, this is Pieper, raw material for us to shape and produce and use for some end. But over here in the life of Scholé, we have creation that comes from the hand of the Creator, which is here for us to enjoy. And then just finish off this comparison, over here on this side, we have life as being a functionary, and over here we become sub-creators, creative ourselves, making things and enjoying making things that are beautiful and good. Here we have the worker, here we have the lover. On this side, we want everything to be self-explanatory. We want to classify everything, figure everything out, settle it, be done with it. But over here, we have the world as a whole changing and transforming our soul, and we are actually excited about the things that are beyond our ability to completely understand. Here we have the shrunken soul, because it's been absorbed by the total world of work, using Pieper's phrase. And here we have a charged, full soul. Even though that soul is still at pain, because when you experience really good and beautiful things, you still long for more. In fact, it was Lewis who said that joy is a divine longing greater than any human satisfaction. So even when you experience the greatest joy on this earth, you know there's something more. And Pieper talks about this as well, that the kind of celebration we enjoy now, we experience as a precursor of a greater celebration that we intuit is coming. This is considered necessary. This is considered sufficient. This is more like monotony. This is more like adventure. Okay, so that gets us thinking a bit. And maybe it jars us into realizing that maybe we're out of balance. Because both are good, but maybe indeed our bonum utile, our world of work, is too large. And we have a shrunken bonum commune, seeking the communal good. I think that's provocative. Now, this is so much philosophy, isn't it? So, oh, this is great, this is interesting, it's making me think. What about my kids? And what about my lesson plans the rest of the week? We need to talk about that as we finish up. But I'm going to pause again and see what you have said and some of the questions that you've asked here. Okay, Cheryl says, our rest is more like a recovery period so that we can keep doggy paddling rather than restive so that we can walk on the water with Jesus. So I think she's right. She realizes the distinction, the way we kind of deceive ourselves into thinking we're resting when really we're just taking a break so that we can do more work. The break is not for our soul. The break is so that we can go back to work. Joy in the journey, Linda. Taryn says, good question. I think that the rhythm of work and rest needs to be in harmony, but that doesn't mean equal, does it? Yeah, finding that harmony is an important thing, and it's not formulaic. Tom, where do we establish thresholds from gazing into graven images? Okay. For instance, Christians in worship can know God truly via His Word. Paintings like nature can help us see the exhaustive quality of knowledge that can point out God's attributes and our guilt, but distract from rest in Christ and truth. What say? Yes, this is that's Tom's question. It's a walk of wisdom, isn't it? Because anything can become an idol. And that's, I think, another reason why we need, of course, in the Christian tradition, Scripture, the liturgy of the church calendar, our pastors speaking to us truth, and friends around us. This is one reason why I think it does need to be a commune, a community. We need to do things together because, as Jonathan Edwards said, we find good names for all our evil deeds. So anything can slip in and take over in ways that it shouldn't. Great warning. Adrian says, thanks for this. Could you give some practical examples on how to apply this concept to our homeschools? I really like what you're saying about this concept. And that is the question. And that's how I think we need to end it, with some talk about the practical matters, and we'll get to that in a moment. Okay, so Cheryl says, those are utile questions, right? Lesson plans, practicalities, explanations. Not that they aren't needed eventually, but we will not get a perfect answer if the commune is included, the whole, the tension, the wrestling. Right, these things work together. Now let me pause here for a moment, because these are really good questions. When you start thinking about these principles, and that's what we're really recovering, a set of ideas, that's what we're talking about now anyway, we need to think also about the practices that flow from them. And I think there's a natural relationship between principles and practice. You might call it philosophy and practice or theory and practice. But we have to think very carefully about the ideas and then the practices. And they really come together, and they really can't be fully separated. In fact, if you look at a set of practices, you'll see that already embedded in those practices is a philosophy. So I think if you think deeply about these ideas, the practices will begin to suggest themselves. They begin to just sprout up. So think deeply about these ideas, and I think you will know what to do in a large respect. However, that's not appropriate to just stop there. We do need to talk about practices, and we do need to ask ourselves and ask others, well, what have you done to apply this and learn from one another? So let's talk about that for a little bit. And for that, I'm going to move on to the next slide. And this I don't really need to spend much time on. This is a little bit more just looking at some auxiliary concepts. So here's some synonyms. So I'm getting to that practical stuff. Synonyms: Scholé, otium, leisure, reflection, focus, study, rest, solitude, festival, friendship, admiration, which means in the Latin to look at something. If you admire something, you are looking at it, you're looking to it with intention. Antonyms would be multitasking, frenzy, bustle, activity, busyness, anxiety, amusement, which means to be without the musis in the Greek, distraction, idleness, boredom. And I like the way someone reversed the old cliche, don't just do something, stand there. Sometimes we just need to take some time and stand. And I'll move through this quickly as we start to go to practices. The purpose of the Scholé life is to obtain the object of your desire and loves. It's to enter into the high things, the good things, the true and beautiful things. To become what you behold. As you behold these things, they start to transform you. Just as Tom was warning, idols, if you stare at an idol, you'll become like the idol. But if you stare at the good thing, it begins to have an impact on you that's very beneficial. You're transformed, you're reoriented, you start finding the direction that makes the most sense for a human life lived well. And you fulfill and exercise your humanity because you were made, as I believe in the Christian tradition, to wonder, to celebrate, to admire, to praise, and to worship. And you are not going to be fulfilled until you can sing the praise of something that is good. That's the way you're made. That's why even a great cup of coffee, right? We have to praise it. You've got to get this cocoa that I got that is so good. I love that cup. Where did you get that? We're just made to praise things. And of course, we criticize things too, but we want to admire. And it's only a life of Scholé that enables us to do that well and to have the time to really enjoy the things that are good. All right. Now let's talk about the practical. You know what? Even though I've been thinking about this for some time and I visit a lot of schools and home schools and so forth, I always like to stop at this point and ask people like you what you have done. Because you don't have to hear a seminar on this to already have known about it. In fact, you've already done this in your life, right? I think in the next slide I talk about that. Where is that? You've already done this. It's already been a part of you. So even though we lack models and so forth, you have experienced this. You already know something about this. So tell the group what some of the things that you've done that are practical that really flow out of a life of contemplation and Scholé. So I bet there's already some there. Let's see. Okay, so Maria says, in our homeschool we have a tea time each Friday afternoon where each child gets to read something they wrote that week and discuss anything from their history, science, literature that they found interesting. That is great. Look, you know what's great about that? You can see that it comes right out of this idea that we've been discussing, and it's simple. It's simple and elegant. It doesn't take a degree in elementary education or to do something that's going to be so meaningful. Festival. Allison says, I like seeing festival because we can discredit this as utile in terms of prep and forget the leisure behind it. Yes, that's why the church has so many holidays, holy days, feast days. We need to recover that. We need to recover fasting and feasting. And even the Greeks and Romans had lots of festival days. And it was in those festival days that they got to display their learning, their singing, their dancing, and so forth. They understood that life was supposed to have this element to it because because they were made in the image of God. We're made to celebrate, we're made to worship. Even though they didn't have the benefit of the revelation that came from Christ, they understood that. Galen says, the late Dr. Dallas Willard quoted and said this: "A life devoted to beauty, truth, and goodness in the power of the risen and living Christ, who is with you in all that you do." How beautiful is that? Okay, Sarah says nature walks. Yes. Pieper says this all the time, that just getting outside in the midst of beauty has its own transforming power. We don't get outside enough. We don't give ourselves time when we are outside. Wendell Berry is so good on this topic. His novel Jayber Crow talks about how, as he's living along the side of a river and really enjoying and has learned how to contemplate and enjoy beauty and how it's transformed him. He speaks of that. He talks about the fishermen and the tourists who go in their motorboats speeding down the river in front of his cabin, unable to see the beauty that's around them. He very powerfully communicates that. We need to take time to see again. Cheryl says, wise ladies assign our high school students to reflect on their history and literature readings in journals each week. Reflection journals are a tremendous application of this idea. Emily says, a friend has a literary guild once a month for the kids to share poems, pieces of music, etc., followed by fun. Some good food. Think about it. Plato's Symposium, we get this word symposium, it means with drinks. So, if I could give you, this is a thought experiment I often give, if I could give you $2,000 and say, here's $2,000, the only catch is you can't buy anything with it, you have to use it as an experience, and you need to be with some of your best friends. What would you do? Wouldn't you go someplace beautiful, have some really good food and drink, and talk about the ideas that are most important to you? Talk about the great books that you've read, great paintings, great experiences. Isn't that what refreshes us most? So that idea is trying to apply that to children. Boy, just great stuff. See, I knew I didn't need to prepare for this part of the seminar. Alice says, nature walks, nature studies. This all explains why I love studying nature. It enlightens my mind and brings true rest to my soul, while enlarging it at the same time. I want to start nature journals with my kids. Wow. Well said. C.S. Lewis and his friends, Tolkien and others, they used to love to do nature walks, not just for an hour, but for days. They would walk from inn to inn. Can you imagine talk about that $2,000 thought experiment. Can you imagine walking along the rolling hills of the English countryside with a group of your favorite friends in beautiful weather, walking all day until you ended up at an inn and sat in front of a roaring fire and had really good food and drink and talked into the night, and then got up in the morning and walked to the next inn? Who's ready to sign up for that? I'm ready to sign up now. And you could imagine the conversation that people like Charles Williams and Lewis and Tolkien would have as they spent those kind of days together. Can we do the same thing with our kids in an appropriate, age-appropriate way? All right, so let's finish up. I'm going to give you the best practical advice I can give you right now is, let me make sure I didn't miss anything important. Good, that was the end. So I am really done. The best practical advice I can give you right now is go watch that video by Jenny Rollins at classicaleducator.com. I'm going to go ahead and type it into the chat box here just so that it's typed in nice and clear. It's Jenny Rollins. She's a wonderful young teacher at the Ambrose School, and the video is called Liturgical Classroom, and it's at classicaleducator.com. If you're not a member there, you can sign up pretty easily, and I think you can even view some videos without signing up. I'm not sure, but it's very easy to sign up if you'd like.
Great.
And it's at no cost. So it's a long tradition, and I'm finishing my last slide here. A long tradition, some some resources that will acquaint you with this tradition. Speaking of distractions, here's my phone ringing. The Intellectual Life by Serge. Here it is. Leisure, the Basis of Culture, and that book by Nouwen, The Prodigal Son. I'm going to stop there and thank you for spending some of your time with me, and then just open it up for maybe 3 or 4 minutes of questions now. Feel free as well in the chat box to list some of your comments. I think all of us have enjoyed some of the great comments and ideas, but we will take some questions too. Will this webinar be available to watch for those who missed today? Yes, we're going to. It's being recorded, and we will post the link on our website under the resources section. Oh yes, my email address. I'll put that in the chat box there for you. cperrin@classicalsubjects.com. There you go. Someone asked about the other 7 webinars. You know, we have kind of used some different resources to record them, so they are a bit scattered right now. There's some on YouTube. There's a YouTube channel, Christopher Perrin, the YouTube channel. You can find some there. Also on Classical Educator, the introductory seminar on the 8 essential principles of classical education is there. We are going to consolidate them all and put them on our resources page at classicalacademicpress.com. So that'll be coming in a couple of weeks. Sorry we don't have them all together in one spot right now. Great, good to see some of these other ideas. Thank you to everyone. Okay. You see if I make sure I haven't missed any other questions. Excellent. We'll sign off now and just say, multos gratias tibi ago. Thank you very much. God bless you as you go out and seek to apply these ideas in some practical ways in your own schools and home schools. Hope to see you next time on another webinar.